And our first up is Beth Dyson from the University of Leeds, who's going to talk about authentic curricula based on assessment. Beth.
Thank you. So I wanted to really talk today about some of the experiences and strategies that I've used over the last few years when trying to implement authentic assessment. And what I wanted to talk really about was the fact that I've been trying to do this at a program level. So quite a lot of the papers and the research and the advice around implementing authentic assessment are done at the individual assessment level or at a module level. And trying to put this in at a program level is slightly difficult. I do understand that most of you won't get the chance to completely redesign an undergraduate program in one go, but we've got a lot of MSc courses coming through, and I'm going to talk about my experiences putting them into MSc courses in science communication and in sustainable agriculture. So I called my abstract putting the cart before the horse because there's lots and lots of different definitions about what authentic assessment is and what it means to different people. They're all in the same kind of vein. There's not much argument in there, but a lot of them come up with the idea that in an authentic assessment model, the assessments are what drives the curriculum. So your assessments are what drives what you teach. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, which is a science communication MSc that was redeveloped a few years ago. It's a relatively vocational course, and in this case, we literally redesigned the curriculum around those assessments that we wanted, around skills that we wanted students to have. There are loads of benefits to authentic assessment, and they include being able to teach at those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. You get an increased or a benefit to student experience. You can get increased employability. Employability skills built into the programs, and a final one which I wanted to just kind of mention is that a lot of our university strategies and education strategies are now all around producing graduates that are functioning members of society and are going to be leaders for change and advocates in various things. And again, authentic assessment can do that. And it was the last two really that I wanted to pick up when I was implementing this with SciComm, because it's a master's course. So these are students that are doing this to kind of improve their employability skills. They're not necessarily coming in, and they're tending to be specialising towards a specific industry at that point. And when I looked at how we did it, there are tons and tons of different models and different steps. There are some 13-step models, there are 4-step models of how you actually make your assessment authentic, but they did all seem to be based really at that individual assessment level or at a module level. There weren't very many at a program level. There weren't very many out there at a postgraduate level either. So a lot of them didn't focus quite so much on the employability aspects as we might expect. And I wanted to really focus on that kind of employability aspect when I was doing it. And the first thing that I realised was that I didn't really know what jobs there were in science communication. So I was given the role of MSc coordinator because I'd done a lot of science communication in an academic sense. I've been as I've gone through my PhD, my postdoc, and my other kind of research careers, I'd done a lot of academic science communication, which is why I was given the role. But actually, I think only out of the last 8 years, only 2 of our science communication MSc graduates have actually gone on to do a PhD. So that is not where those students are kind of ending up. So I went out and spoke to industrial partners and graduate employers about what they wanted their students, their graduates to have. So when they were hiring graduates, what skills did they want those graduates to have? And really then to kind of round that out, I went back and looked at graduates of the course, got some graduate destination data. The university data was terrible, but I was able to find the vast majority of students on LinkedIn. It's helpful with science communication that science communicators tend to be quite active on social media and other forms of media, so they are relatively easy to find. And I looked at those graduates and what they were doing and the destination data that they had. I also did quite a lot of data mining on graduate job websites, so looking through and finding out keywords that were in job adverts and job descriptions. And then I also spoke to our current students about what they wanted out of their MSc. Out of this, we got tons and tons of information back. I was shocked actually at how willing employers were willing to engage with me on this, because they were seeing that they wanted graduates with certain skills and they weren't getting them. So they were very, very happy to kind of engage with this. There was lots of content stuff, which I won't go into because it's not necessarily relevant. Some of these would potentially be skills-based in other programs, because video and audio skills are something that you might want to bring out. But for us, that was more content-based, because we actually had to teach them how to do it and how to do it properly in terms of being able to edit and use various bits of software. So these were all content-based. And then in terms of skills, I went through and tried to allocate all of the different skills and personality traits that were asked for by our employers into different kind of bins to see what was most important. Because obviously graduate employers all talk in different languages. So they might have, when you come to something like group work or teamwork, they call it many different things, but it all boils down to the same thing. I then looked at what was most important to these partners, and was quite shocked actually at some of the things that came out as being really, really highly important in these graduate jobs. Project management was one that came out top. It was one that every graduate employer that I spoke to nearly wanted to look at. Leadership, group work, I was expecting to be on there, but maybe not quite so high. Networking, interpersonal skills. There was a lot on this about being able to talk to different people with different levels of scientific knowledge and being able to adapt to your communication. And there were written and verbal communication skills, which we kind of expected. So then I went back and looked at our program and said, does the employer and graduate feedback match the program assessment and learning objectives? And realised that not really. It didn't really match up. Quite a lot of this was drift. It's a relatively old program, and it's been shuffled around departments. It's been shuffled around different members of staff. So there was lots of things that had moved slightly within that without an overall kind of an approach. I mapped our assessments. We were over assessing by quite a long way. So there were 23 assessments across the year in 8 modules, and the vast majority were written pieces. There was 1 exam, 2 presentations, 1 video and 1 photograph across the course. And of the written pieces, some were authentic, some were kind of authentic, and some were not very authentic at all. And some were authentic, but probably not for those students. So there was a standard UKRI grant proposal, was one of the biggest pieces of assessment. These students don't go into academic careers. So it's an authentic assessment, but it's not relevant to the students and what they're going to be doing kind of in the future. I then highlighted 5 different skills that we weren't assessing at all, and looked at how I could then embed those skills into assessment throughout the course, and change the assessment map slightly. I've managed to reduce the assessment. Hopefully it will continue to be reduced across that year. And I took out the exam, increased the number of different kinds of presentations that they do. Verbal communication skills were really, really key and high up on that list. Introduced video and audio pieces in both formative and summative assessments, because video and audio is just key in science communication now. You can't really get away with not doing it or engaging with it in some way. And then added in reflective assessments, group projects, an outreach project, and some more specific data analysis. So the data analysis that we were doing was being taught but not assessed. So I made sure that it was actually being assessed in the assessments. One example of a new assessment that came through was a student group project. We talked about group projects. They're not necessarily that popular, but what we wanted to do here was introduce leadership skills and group work skills. So each student was assigned an aspect of the project to lead, and each student had to lead a number of group meetings through the project. They were forced to reflect on each meeting and submit that reflection. And then they were forced to reflect on leading the meetings as well. And then post-delivery of the project, they had to go back and evaluate how the project had gone, either using some metrics that they'd collected during the project or after. And I've said project here, we did an outreach project and we did a video project as well. So there were kind of 2 different ways of approaching this. And they had to really think about evaluating their own kind of team performance. That meant we needed lots of new talk material, so they had to be taught a little bit of project management. They had to be taught how to work as a group and why we work as a group. Reflection and evaluation skills. I stole from psychology, but it works really well, and kind of put in lectures on how students reflect and how they should be thinking about this, and supported all that with drop-in sessions, feedback, and some kind of small group tutorials where students could come and talk to me about the group work and how they were feeling and how it was all going and whether they felt they were confident in those kind of aspects. Adding authenticity to existing assessments was really difficult, mainly for reasons of bureaucracy and personality. It was quite difficult to get people to engage with this kind of thing and to change their assessments, but we managed to do a few little tweaks to some assessments to make them slightly more authentic. So, for example, in the video and audio assessments, we used to give them a generic non-specialist audience to tailor to. Then they had to choose from a list of very, very specific audiences, because when you go into a science communication company, they have a client, and they have a client who is has a really specific audience that they want to target. They very rarely say just everybody in the world. They want to target a really specific person who's paying to do it. So we tried to build that in as well. If we're looking at evaluation of whether this works or not, there are too many confounding factors, but there are some data that shows I'm not making this worse. So in terms of employment at 9 months past graduation, that was going up. COVID hit, the science communication area, especially the kind of online and virtual thing, is growing massively, so that's not necessarily a surprise anyway. The performance grades for students who went on placement also went up, so employers were saying that students were performing better in their projects. Don't at me, I know these numbers are really high, but when you try and explain to an industrial partner that they cannot give a mark of 100%, even though the student has behaved perfectly, they get really upset with you. So I know we're kind of trying to bring that down, but it's university marking versus real world, real life stuff. And I also went back to some of our partners and said, do you think the quality of your student placement this year has stayed the same, gone down or gone up? And all of them said it had either stayed the same or gone up. And the vast majority said that they thought the performance of the student had gone up. So we've got some relatively positive feedback about what's going on. We've talked about group work and whether students like group work, so I'm not going to cover that. They were kind of okay with it by the end of the module. They weren't happy during it or at the beginning. We had lots of discussions about it and they got to like it. And just to say, I'm now doing this in sustainable agriculture, trying to kind of map these assessments and skills. And what I'm really looking at the moment that's being quite difficult to do is linking content to skills. So when designing a program from scratch rather than a redesign, trying to put the skills into place and then finding people who are willing to teach those bits to lead towards those assessments is what's really kind of causing me some issues at the moment. So I'm spending a lot of time with these post notes and moving them around and trying to figure out what I'm going to put where and in which modules. So yeah, thanks for that. I've gone over slightly, but thanks for that. And if you've got any questions, give me a shout.
So any questions about the assessment? Yes,
simple one, Beth. You know the section where you've got different audiences?
Yeah.
I really like that. And could students choose which audience they address, or they do give them an audience?
No, they could choose. But when we told them to choose audiences in the past, they would go, well, mine is a 25-year-old bloke and he lives in London and he does this and he works in this job and this is how much science knowledge he's got. So when you ask students to choose their own from scratch, they make someone really specific that nobody's ever going to target to. Or they genuinely used to choose a 21-year-old person who's got a biology degree, who's currently doing a master's at a university, and you're like, no, that's not going to help you in future. So we just picked quite a few different ones.
Did you see a trend in the groups that students picked, or was it quite spread out?
Yeah, so we also have this thing where a lot of our students either go into teaching or they go into policy or whatever, and you can see through the course that they usually started off with one that they thought was quite easy, which was a relatively well-educated person. At the beginning, as the course went through, they could then specialise and be flexible as to what careers they were going into. So we had somebody who did a placement in policy, who then obviously chose policy advisor as her audience for most of her assessments. We recommended that they did a broad range, but I didn't hold them to that. If they knew they wanted to be in teaching and they chose a school audience every time, that's fine by me.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, I didn't see you there.
It's more a comment than a question, but I was interested by your experience that you had problems with the placement providers trying to give a student 100% for a mark, which is an interesting comparison to university. So 75% is absolutely perfect, cannot be improved.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bit of a lesson for us, is actually why can't we give 100%?
Yeah, I'm saying, well, we don't normally give marks of 80, and they're going, well, why? Well, it is, but yeah, it's a problem with grade inflation, obviously, that those marks, they're only worth 10%, but 10% of a 60 credit module can significantly bump those numbers up, and we don't want to be inflating grades at the moment, particularly.
I can't imagine why.
No, thank you very much
indeed.